When I saw her standing at the restaurant entrance, the same dark eyes, the same half smile, my wine glass slipped from my hand. It shattered on the marble floor, and with it, the illusion of the life I thought I had built. The woman was my husband's mirror, almost. Her hair was shorter, her posture sharper. But she looked exactly like him. And when she said, "Happy anniversary, Evelyn," my knees went weak. That's how my perfect evening, our 10-year wedding anniversary, turned into the night my marriage began to unravel. 10 years earlier, if you'd told me this would be my life, I would have laughed. Back then, my world was simple, a cozy suburban home, 2 growing kids, and a husband I adored. David was the quiet kind of man, thoughtful, always precise. He worked as an architect, which somehow made sense. He liked structure, lines, things that stayed where they belonged. We met at a charity fundraiser where I was helping with decorations. He spent the night talking about lighting angles and how buildings could breathe. I thought it was adorable, the way he saw meaning in simple things. He proposed a year later with a small ring and trembling hands. We married in spring. I remember the lilacs, they were everywhere. That smell still follows me sometimes, like memory refusing to fade. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I stayed home when the kids were small, Emma and Josh, while David climbed the ranks at his firm. We had rituals. Pancakes every Sunday, movie nights every Friday, and long walks on evenings when the sky turned pink. He was steady, dependable. If I were to describe my husband in one word, it would have been safe. That's why when the first odd thing happened, I brushed it off. A few months before our anniversary, David became distant. Not cold, just quieter. He'd sit on the porch staring at nothing, sometimes fiddling with his phone. When I asked what was wrong, he'd smile, that thin, polite smile that husbands give when they don't want to be questioned. "Work's just been heavy," he'd say. "The firm's got new clients. Lots of travel coming up." I wanted to believe him. So I did. I planned our 10th anniversary as something special, a renewal of us. A private dinner at the same restaurant where we'd gone on our first date. I even found the old dress I wore that night, the navy one he said made me look like a storm he never wanted to end. I wanted to remind him who we were before the silence. For weeks I rehearsed how I'd tell him, about the scrapbook I'd made, the weekend getaway I booked, the letter I'd written him. It was supposed to be a night about love and new beginnings. But as I dressed that evening, something inside me felt uneasy. Maybe it was the way he'd avoided talking about the plans, or how he'd been receiving strange calls at night, stepping outside to take them. Still, I told myself, don't ruin the night with paranoia, Evelyn. The restaurant was warm and golden. A jazz trio played in the corner, and the soft hum of conversation filled the air. David looked handsome in his charcoal suit, though I noticed his eyes darting to the entrance more than once. "Expecting someone?" I teased. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just checking the time. You know me, can't stand being late." I laughed lightly, but my fingers tightened around the napkin. Halfway through dinner, just as the waiter brought out the champagne, she appeared. The air seemed to change, as if the whole room took a breath. She walked in confidently, eyes scanning the room until they landed on us. For a second, I thought it was David, that maybe I was seeing his reflection somewhere unexpected. But then she smiled, and something inside me froze. "David," she said softly, standing by our table. "Aren't you going to introduce me?" He looked like he'd seen a ghost. His fork clattered onto the plate. My heart pounded in my chest. "Evelyn," he stammered, "this is, I'm Diane," she said, cutting in smoothly. "His twin sister." Twin sister. The words hit me like cold water. My husband had been my husband for 10 years, we'd built a life together, raised children, shared everything, and never once, not once, had he mentioned a twin. I forced a polite smile, though my mind was spinning. "Oh," I managed, "you never told me you had a sister." David's face paled. "It's complicated." Diane's gaze was steady, almost pitying. "Yes," she said softly, "it is." The waiter hovered, unsure, then quietly retreated. The clink of glasses around us felt distant, like we were underwater. I wanted to scream, but instead, I picked up my champagne flute. "Well, it's nice to meet you, Diane." She looked at me, really looked, as though studying something fragile. "Likewise," she said, "I've heard so much about you." David shifted uncomfortably. "Diane," but she raised a hand. "Don't worry, brother, I won't spoil the celebration." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper I could barely catch. "Not tonight." Then she walked away, leaving the faint scent of her perfume, cedar and citrus, hanging between us. I turned to David, waiting for him to explain. He just stared at the door, his jaw tight, his eyes hollow. "Who is she, David?" I asked finally. He swallowed. "She's family. That's all you need to know." But in that moment, I knew, whatever this was, it was more than family. That night, I couldn't sleep. David lay beside me, turned away, breathing slow and steady. I stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying every detail, his nervousness, her confidence, the way she'd said "I've heard so much about you." At 2 a.m., I got up and went to the kitchen. The moonlight spilled across the counter, catching on the crystal vase from our wedding, the one engraved with both our names. I ran my fingers over the letters, wondering which of them were still true. And in that quiet, I promised myself something. I would find out who Diane really was, and what my husband was hiding. The next morning, David acted as though nothing had happened. He made coffee, kissed the kids goodbye, and left for work with the same easy smile he'd worn for years. But I saw it, the way his hands trembled slightly when he picked up his keys, the way his eyes avoided mine. He didn't say a word about Diane. Not one word. I tried to play along at first. Pretend that maybe it was nothing, maybe there really was a twin he simply didn't talk about for, 10 years. But deep down, I already knew that wasn't true. That day, I couldn't focus on anything. The kids were at school, and the house was too quiet. Every sound, the ticking clock, the refrigerator hum, felt louder than it should have been. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I went through his old photo boxes. David kept everything organized, labeled folders for work, receipts, even birthdays. But when I opened the family box, something felt off. There were pictures from our wedding, vacations, baby showers. But no childhood photos. None. I'd always assumed he was just private about his past. I never questioned it, not really. When I once asked about his parents, he'd said, "They're gone. Let's not dig up old things." Now that line echoed in my head like a warning. I found an old envelope tucked in the back of the box, a medical insurance form from years ago. David's emergency contact, Diane Hale. My breath caught. I flipped through the other papers. There she was again, listed as a co-signer on a property agreement dated just before our wedding. Diane Hale. Same last name, same address, one I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I typed it into Google. A house on the outskirts of town. Something in me broke open then, curiosity mixed with anger, with fear. When David came home that night, I was waiting in the living room. The kids were asleep, the lights dim. He set down his briefcase and looked at me cautiously. "Everything okay?" I didn't answer. I just held up the envelope. "Who is she, David? And don't say, family." "Not this time," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "Evelyn, please, it's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." My voice cracked, because I stood in front of that woman, and she looked at me like I was some stranger who didn't belong in my own marriage. He hesitated. "It's complicated. You keep saying that," I whispered. "What does that even mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he sat down and buried his face in his hands. I waited. The silence stretched between us until it became unbearable. Finally, he said, "She's my twin, yes. But she's also the reason I left home." I frowned. "Left home? You told me your parents died." He nodded slowly. "They did, but not before Diane ruined everything." The words felt rehearsed, too smooth. "She stole from them, from me. She made a mess of our family, and I didn't want her in my life anymore." I searched his face. "Then why is she listed as your emergency contact? Why is her name on your property papers?" His eyes flickered, just for a moment, and I saw the lie form before he spoke. "That must have been a mix-up." I don't even remember that." I didn't argue. I just nodded and said quietly, "Okay." But something inside me shifted. I knew I couldn't trust his answers anymore. For the next few days, I observed. Quietly, David started coming home later. He'd say, "Client dinner," or, "Site visit ran long." His phone was glued to him, never left unattended. Once, while he showered, I checked it. Locked. He'd never locked it before. That night, I lay awake listening to the sound of water running, and I wondered how long he'd been living two lives, and which one I was in. The following morning, I called the number listed next to Diane's name on that old form. It rang twice before. She answered. "Hello." Her voice was calm, almost amused. "Diane," I said. "This is Evelyn, David's wife." A pause. Then a soft chuckle. "Ah, so you found me." My grip tightened on the phone. I just want to understand what's going on. She sighed, as if she'd expected that line. It's not my place to tell you. But you should ask your husband about 2013. About how he left home. What happened in 2013? But the line went dead. That night, when David got home, I didn't confront him. Instead, I played it differently. I made his favorite dinner, rosemary chicken and roasted potatoes, the same meal I'd cooked the night he proposed. He looked surprised. What's all this for? I smiled gently, just trying to reconnect. We ate mostly in silence. When he finished, I poured him another glass of wine and asked, "Do you ever think about 2013? He froze mid-sip. Why would you ask that? I shrugged, feigning innocence. Just wondering. That's when you started your firm, right? Must have been a big year. He nodded slowly. Yeah, a lot changed that year. Like meeting me. Exactly. I smiled, pretending to buy it, but inside, my heart was pounding. When he went to bed, I took his car keys and quietly stepped outside. The night air was cold, the streets silent except for the chirp of crickets. I unlocked his car and searched the glove compartment. Inside was a folder, blue, worn, and tucked beneath some work papers. Inside it, I found what I was looking for, property deeds. But not for our home. For a house under both their names. The same address I'd found earlier. And the date of purchase. 2 months after our wedding. I sat there in the car, shaking, as the reality settled in. He'd been hiding something since the beginning. A secret so deep it required an entire other life to protect it. My husband hadn't just lied. He'd built a marriage on a foundation of deceit, and I was finally seeing the cracks. I locked the car, walked back inside, and lay beside him. He was already asleep, breathing steady and unbothered. For a long moment, I stared at him, the man I'd loved for a decade, the father of my children, the architect of my world, and wondered which version of him was real. The one beside me, or the one living at that other address. Either way, by morning, I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I told David the first was taking the kids to my mother's for the weekend. He barely looked up from his laptop. That's fine, he said, distracted. I've got a lot of work anyway. He didn't ask which day I'd be back. He didn't ask if I needed help packing. That silence told me everything I needed to know. He'd already made space for my absence. But I wasn't going to my mother's. I dropped the kids off at a friend's house and drove straight to that address, the one on the property papers, the one tied to Diane Hale. It was an hour outside the city, near the edge of an old industrial district that had started turning suburban again. A quiet street, trees on both sides. The house itself was modest, 2 stories, gray shutters, a red door. There was a car in the driveway. His car. My stomach dropped. I parked 2 houses down and waited, heart hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. After a few minutes, the door opened. David stepped out, but he wasn't alone. Diane followed. Same height, same dark hair, same eyes. For a split second, it felt like watching my husband walk beside me, except it wasn't me. It was her. They talked briefly, and then, she reached up and kissed him. Softly, familiarly, and he didn't pull away. The air left my lungs. I couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. Every suspicion, every small lie, every late night, client meeting, it all fell into place like shattered glass forming a picture I'd been too blind to see. They weren't siblings. They were lovers. And somehow, the lie was so intricate, so practiced, that he'd made me believe she was family. I took a photo, hands trembling, of them together by the car. Proof. Not because I needed revenge, but because I needed reality. Something solid to hold on to. Then I drove. I didn't know where I was going, just away. I ended up at a motel on the edge of town. The kind with flickering signs and vending machines that only took coins. For hours, I sat there, staring at that photo. I thought about the years, the anniversaries, the nights he'd held me while I cried after my father died, the way he'd laugh when our son made silly jokes. How could all of that coexist with this? How could someone live 2 lives so seamlessly? At midnight, I finally called him. He answered on the second ring. Hey, he said, calm, almost relieved. How's your mom? I let the silence hang. Then, quietly, I said, you should stop lying, David. What do you mean? His tone sharpened instantly. I saw you, I said. At the house. With her. There was a pause, then a sharp inhale. Evelyn, don't. I cut him off. Don't you dare say her name again. You've lied enough. He didn't speak. Just breathed. Finally, he said, it's not what you think. Then what is it? I whispered. Because from where I stood, it looked exactly like what it is, betrayal. There was another long pause, and then he said something that froze me completely. She's my wife. I felt the world tilt. What? I married her first, he said, voice low, almost mechanical. A long time ago. We separated. She changed her name, started over. And when I met you, You what? I didn't think you'd understand. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that didn't even feel like me. Understand what? That you're a bigamist, that you built a second marriage on top of a lie. He sighed. It wasn't supposed to go this far. She and I were done. Legally, emotionally, everything. But when she showed up again, things got complicated. I closed my eyes. Complicated. You've been sleeping with your first wife while raising a family with your second. He didn't deny it. Evelyn, he said softly, I love you. That hasn't changed. I almost laughed again. Then what would you call this? He said nothing. So I ended the call. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on that motel bed, listening to the hum of the air conditioner and the slow unraveling of the life I'd built. In the morning, I drove back home. He was waiting for me, sitting on the porch, head in his hands. When he saw me, he stood. Evelyn, please, we need to talk. I didn't answer. I just handed him the photo. He looked at it, then at me. I never meant for you to find out like this. Find out what? I snapped. That our entire marriage is a lie. He stepped closer. It wasn't a lie. I love you, Evelyn. I love our kids. That house, that part of my life, it's over. Over, I whispered. You were there yesterday. He swallowed hard. I went to end it. I stared at him. By kissing her. He had no answer. I turned to go inside, but he grabbed my arm. Not roughly, but enough to make me stop. Please, he said, don't destroy this. Don't tell the kids. Let me fix it. I pulled free. You don't get to fix it. You had 10 years to fix it. He flinched, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing me, but fear of exposure. Because if anyone found out, the firm, the community, our friends, everything he'd built would collapse. And that's when I realized. This wasn't just about love anymore. It was about control. That night, while he slept on the couch, I sat at the kitchen table and made copies of every document I'd found, the property papers, the insurance forms, even the marriage certificates I'd pulled online. I placed them in an envelope and sealed it. Not out of spite, out of protection. If he could live one lie, he could live another. And I wasn't going to be the next casualty in his story. The next morning, I told him it was over. I'm filing for divorce, I said quietly. He didn't argue, didn't beg, just nodded, as if he'd already rehearsed this ending. But as I turned to walk away, he said something that made my blood run cold. You think you know everything, Evelyn, he said softly. But you don't know what Diane's capable of. I froze. What do you mean? He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear on his face. She's not who you think she is. She's dangerous. And now that you've crossed her. He stopped himself. What? I demanded. He shook his head. Just, be careful. And then he left. I stood there in the doorway, envelope in hand, unsure what to believe anymore, the liar I'd married, or the stranger who claimed to be my husband's other life. But one thing was certain. This wasn't over. Not yet. I didn't see Diane again for almost 2 weeks. 2 weeks of silence, of pretending to be fine while my children asked where their father was, and my friends whispered questions I couldn't yet answer. I went through the motions, school drop-offs, dinner at 6, bills and laundry and fake smiles, all while wondering if I was living inside someone else's life. The only sign of her came on a Thursday morning. A white envelope slipped under my front door. No address, no stamp, just my name, Evelyn, written in clean, looping script. Inside was a single photograph. Me, standing outside that house the day I followed them. Taken from across the street. The back of the photo had a message, written in the same handwriting. We should talk. You deserve the truth too. No signature. But I didn't need one. That evening, I told my sister, Marianne, that I might be meeting her. Are you insane? She said. She's his other wife. What could you possibly need from her? The truth, I said. I need to hear it from someone who isn't lying to me. Marianne sighed. You're playing with fire, Evie. Maybe I was. But when someone has burned down your life, a little more smoke doesn't scare you anymore. We met the next day at a quiet cafe near the river. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting by the window, wearing a cream-colored coat and that same calm, unreadable expression she'd worn the night of my anniversary. She looked like me, not in face, but in spirit. A mirror warped by experience. Evelyn, she said, standing to shake my hand. Thank you for coming. Her tone was polite, almost gentle. I hated her for it. I don't know why I'm here, I said, sitting down. Yes, you do. She smiled faintly. You want to understand what David never told you. I said nothing. She stirred her coffee slowly, as if measuring her words. David and I married young, she began. He was 21. I was 20. We thought we were invincible. Her eyes flicked toward the window. But he wasn't faithful. He lied to me before he ever lied to you. I crossed my arms. Then why stay in touch? Why the house? Why the kiss? She laughed softly, a sound that made my skin crawl. Because, Evelyn, I never left him. He left me. There was something in her tone, sharp, possessive. She leaned closer. I built him. I stood by him when he was nothing. So when he married you, I thought, let her enjoy the fantasy. But I always knew he'd come back. I stared at her, speechless. You're proud of this? Her smile didn't waver. I'm not proud. I'm owed. I shook my head. He said you're dangerous. Her eyes softened, just for a moment. Oh, darling. Of course he did. That's what men say when women stop being convenient. She reached into her bag and slid something across the table, a flash drive. What's this? I asked. Proof, she said, of everything he's done, to both of us. Bank transfers, emails, photos. You'll see who he really is. I hesitated. Why give this to me? Because, she said, sipping her coffee, you're not my enemy, Evelyn. You're just his latest casualty. And when you're done hurting, maybe we can finally make him pay. That night, I sat in my living room staring at that flash drive. I didn't want to open it. But curiosity has a way of sounding like justice when your heart is broken. I plugged it in. Inside were hundreds of files, emails, screenshots, financial statements. Money transferred between accounts, private conversations, even messages to other women. It wasn't just Diane, there were others. He'd built a web of lies so intricate it could have been its own corporation. One file stood out, titled, A.H. When I opened it, I found documents naming an offshore account, with my name listed as a secondary beneficiary. My chest tightened. He was using me, my identity, my stability, to hide his money. I sat there in the dark, the only light coming from the computer screen, and whispered to myself, who did I marry? The next morning, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You opened it. Good. Now you know what he's capable of. Be careful who you trust next. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a signature. Her voice echoed through every word. 2 nights later, David showed up unannounced. He looked tired, worn down, almost desperate. Evelyn, he said, standing in the doorway. We need to talk. I didn't move. About which part? The lies or the crimes? His eyes widened. What are you talking about? Your hidden accounts, I said. Your transfers. The women. He went pale. She gave it to you. She told me everything. He shook his head, stepping inside. Then you don't know what she's doing. She's setting you up. I crossed my arms. Funny, that's what she said about you. He slammed his fist against the table. She's dangerous, Evelyn. She'll destroy you just to get to me. I flinched but didn't back down. Maybe you deserve that. He grabbed my shoulders. Listen to me. She's not right in the head. A knock interrupted him. 3 slow taps on the door. We both froze. Then, through the window, I saw her. Standing under the porch light, perfectly calm, holding a folder. Diane, let me in, David, she called out, voice smooth as glass. It's time you stopped hiding. He turned to me, eyes wild. Don't open that door. I looked between them, my husband, shaking for the first time in his life, and the woman who claimed she'd built him. I took a deep breath and reached for the handle. Because whatever this was, whatever they'd built together, I was done being the one left in the dark. The air between us was electric, like the quiet before lightning strikes. When I opened the door, Diane didn't step in right away. She just looked at David, her expression unreadable. Well, she said softly, I see you finally told her. David's jaw tightened. She knows enough. She turned to me, eyes glinting. Enough. Oh no, darling, he's barely scratched the surface. Diane, stop, he barked, stepping forward. But she didn't flinch. She handed me the folder she was carrying. It's all there, Evelyn. The businesses, the money laundering, the fake charities. He used your name to build it. My hands trembled as I took the folder. Inside were more documents, photos, even a forged signature of mine on some legal forms. You're lying, David hissed. She smirked. Am I? You used my name, too. You always did love collecting lives. His voice broke, not in anger, but fear. You don't know what you're doing. She looked almost pitying. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm making sure the world sees who you really are. For a moment, no one spoke. The room seemed to shrink. The kids were asleep upstairs, the house too quiet for what was about to explode. Then Diane turned to leave. Check the last page, Evelyn, she said, her tone almost gentle. You'll know where to send it. She walked out into the night, heels clicking against the pavement, no glance back, no hesitation. When I finally looked at the last page, my breath caught. It was a list of reporters. And one handwritten note at the bottom. The story deserves light. David collapsed onto the couch, his hands covering his face. You have no idea what you've done, he whispered. No, I said quietly. I think I finally do. He looked up, eyes red. She's been after me for years. Everything that went wrong between us, she made it worse. She blackmails, manipulates, and you let her, I interrupted. You let her control you because you never told me the truth. I was protecting you, he said. By lying, I snapped. By making me your shield. He looked away, guilt flooding his face. If she leaks that information, I'll lose everything. I stared at him for a long moment. You already did. The next morning, the story broke. A local news outlet ran a piece on financial misconduct and family scandal. They didn't name him directly, not yet, but the details were unmistakable. His company's name, the neighborhood, the anonymous whistleblower. I didn't need to ask who leaked it. Within hours, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, friends, even his parents. By evening, the truth was everywhere. My husband, the man I'd built a decade of life with, was now the center of a scandal that reached far beyond infidelity. He'd been moving money between shell charities, ones I'd unknowingly signed documents for. My name, my ID, my signature. I was now part of his deception. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, phone in hand, staring at my reflection in the black screen. Marianne called. Evie, are you okay? No, I said softly. But I think I will be. She hesitated. Do you want me to come over? I glanced at the door where David had stormed out hours earlier. No, I think I need to be alone for this part. That night, there was another knock. When I opened it, Diane was standing there again, this time holding a small envelope. Why are you here? I asked. She held it out. I thought you should have this. Inside was a photograph. David, younger, standing beside her in front of a courthouse. They were both holding marriage certificates. The date was 12 years ago, 2 years before I met him. He married me first, she said softly. But it wasn't real, not legally binding. We were kids. He always thought he could outrun it. Her voice wavered slightly. I just wanted him to admit it. To me, to you, to someone. And now, I asked. She smiled sadly. Now, it's over. Are you proud? Her eyes filled with something I didn't expect, regret. No, I'm tired. I looked at her for a long time. You didn't have to destroy him. She nodded slowly. You're right, but maybe he needed to be destroyed to finally stop lying. She turned to leave. You're stronger than you think, Evelyn. Don't let his shadow keep you from your own life. And then she was gone. The days that followed were chaos. David's company launched an investigation. Our accounts were frozen. My name cleared eventually, but not before the humiliation of interviews, questions, and whispers at every corner. The children heard things at school. I heard things in the grocery store. And every night, the house felt heavier with what had been lost. David called a few times, his voice hollow. I'm sorry, he said one night. For everything. I closed my eyes. I know. Do you hate me? I paused. No, but I don't know who you are anymore. Silence. Then he whispered, neither do I. The day the final article ran, I walked down to the river, the same cafe where I'd first met Diane. I sat there for hours, watching the water move. So steady, so indifferent to human noise. And I realized, peace doesn't come when people stop lying. It comes when you stop needing answers. I never saw Diane again. She vanished as quietly as she'd appeared. No news stories, no letters, no follow-up. Just gone. Sometimes I wonder if she finally found the closure she'd been chasing through vengeance. As for David, he faced the investigations, lost his position, and eventually moved out of state. He still sends birthday cards to the kids. Nothing more, nothing less. And me, I rebuilt. It wasn't dramatic. There were no new beginnings in fancy cities or tearful reconciliations. Just mornings that didn't hurt anymore. A steady job, a small garden, a house that finally felt like mine. When I think back to that night, our 10th anniversary, I realize it wasn't the day my marriage ended. It was the day my illusion did. And what's left, after the lies and the fire, is something quieter, a truth that doesn't need to be explained. It's strange how quiet life feels when the noise finally stops. For months, I thought peace would feel like victory, like standing tall after the storm and shouting, "I survived." But when it finally came, it didn't shout at all. It whispered. It came in small moments. When my son laughed again without looking over his shoulder. When I cooked dinner and realized I wasn't setting 2 extra plates anymore. When I walked into the garden one morning and noticed the lavender had bloomed, even though I hadn't tended to it in weeks. That's how healing begins, not with fireworks, but with flowers quietly deciding to grow again. The world eventually moved on from our scandal. The papers stopped calling, the neighbors stopped whispering, people found new stories to gossip about, and I finally became what I had always wanted to be again: invisible, ordinary, safe. I started working part-time at the local library. The quiet suited me. I liked the way the air smelled of old pages and coffee, and how everyone spoke in soft voices as if the world outside didn't exist. Sometimes, people would still recognize my name. "You're that Evelyn, right? The one from..." And I'd smile politely and say, "Yes, that was me." But inside, I'd think, "No, that was who I used to be." One evening, while shelving returns, I came across a book I hadn't seen in years, The Art of Keeping Secrets. I opened it at random and found a line underlined in pen. Some secrets are not kept to protect others, but to protect the image we wish they had of us. I smiled. It reminded me of David. Of how hard he tried to protect the image of himself that even he couldn't live up to. For a long time, I thought I hated him. But with distance, I learned that hate is just love's echo, what's left when love has nowhere else to go. I didn't forgive him in one grand moment. It came slowly, like the thaw after a long winter. Every time I remembered a small kindness, the way he made tea when I was sick, the lullabies he sang to the kids, forgiveness crept in through the cracks. Not for his sake, but for mine. Because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life being the woman defined by what someone else did wrong. A year after the scandal, I got a letter. It wasn't from David, it was from Diane. No return address. Just my name again, written in that same clean, looping script. Inside, a short note. "I'm living by the sea now. Sometimes I still wake up angry, but it passes. I hope you found your peace. Thank you for seeing me, even when you didn't want to." There was no signature, no explanation, just that, and a small pressed lavender flower tucked inside. I held it for a long time, thinking about how strange life can be, how 2 women who should have been enemies ended up as mirror images of each other, both betrayed, both scarred, both surviving. Maybe she did find peace by the sea. I hope she did. David reached out once more, maybe 6 months later. He wanted to see the children. I agreed. He came to the house one Saturday morning, wearing the same cologne he always had, the one that smelled faintly of cedar and something darker. The kids were cautious but curious. He spoke gently to them, and I saw a softness in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. When he turned to me, he said quietly, "You look well." "I am," I replied. There was a pause. Then he said, "You deserved better." "I know," I said. "But I needed the truth more than I needed better." He nodded, eyes lowering. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry I let you live my lie." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "It wasn't just your lie, David. It was ours. I wanted to believe it too." He didn't argue. And for the first time, we both understood, not all love ends in fire. Some just fades until only the truth remains. That night, after he left, I stood by the window and watched the streetlights flicker across the empty road. The kids were asleep. The house was still. And I realized something I'd been too hurt to admit before. I didn't want revenge anymore. Because revenge is just another kind of prison, it keeps you living in the same story long after it's ended. What I wanted was peace. And peace, I learned, isn't found in someone else's punishment. It's found in your own freedom. Now, when people ask about that time in my life, I tell them this. Yes, I lost my marriage. Yes, I was betrayed. Yes, I saw sides of people I wish I never had to. But I also found something I didn't know I'd lost, myself. The version of me that didn't need to prove I was enough. The woman who stopped begging for love that had already left. The mother who showed her children that walking away doesn't mean giving up, sometimes it means finally standing up. It's been 2 years since that anniversary. I don't wear my wedding ring anymore. I keep it in a small wooden box with a few letters and that lavender flower. Not as reminders of pain, but as proof that I lived through it. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the air smells faintly of the garden outside, I whisper to myself, "You made it out. You made it whole." Because healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without breaking. If you've ever loved someone who lied to you, if you've ever built a life on what you thought was real, only to watch it crumble, then you know what I mean when I say, the hardest part isn't losing them. It's finding yourself again after they're gone. But it's possible, piece by piece, day by day, just like lavender after winter. That was my story. It wasn't the ending I dreamed of, but it became the beginning I needed. If you were in my place, if your husband's secret tore your family apart, would you have chosen revenge, or peace? Tell me in the comments below. And if my story found a piece of your heart tonight, stay a while. There are more stories to tell.